Hello and welcome back to the RPA Developer Foundation Training. In this demo, we'll cover using if statements in UiPath Studio. Let's begin. The execution of activities inside workflows usually follows a top-to-bottom approach, that is, in the order of their appearance or according to the arrows in the flowchart. Control flow activities, however, break up the flow of execution by employing decision-making, looping, and branching. This allows our process to conditionally execute certain activity blocks. In this demo, we'll learn how to use the if activity when working with sequences. We'll also learn how to use the flow decision activity, which is the equivalent of the if activity when used in flowcharts, and the if operator in VB. They enable our workflow to take one of the two courses of action, depending on whether a specified condition is met or not. But ever wondered what happens when multiple conditions are needed in a workflow? Adding multiple decisions to the workflow design makes it look cluttered and difficult to follow. That's when the else-if statement comes in handy. In addition to the if statement, we'll also learn how to use the else-if statement, which can add multiple conditions to the else branch. The last evaluation is that of a final else branch after all of the else-if conditions. For this demonstration, consider the following business scenario. For reporting purposes, we need to find out if the reporting year is a leap year or not. Let's start with the logic. A year is a leap year if it meets the following conditions. The year is evenly divisible by 4. If the year is evenly divisible by 100, it is not a leap year, unless the year is also evenly divisible by 400. As for the workflow design, we'll build a simple project that asks the user to input a year. It then checks if the conditions are met and prints a message to indicate if it is a leap year or not. We'll repeat the same workflow by using the else-if statement as well. We encourage you to build along with this demo. You'll find the input files used in the demo after this video. Let's see how we can use an if activity in a sequence workflow. We'll add a sequence, name it leap year, using if and else if, and add an annotation for it as well. Next, we'll add an input dialog activity that we'll use to get the year from the user. Let's fill in the input properties for the activity. Now let's create an int32 variable and add it to the result field of the input dialog. Next, let's add an if activity to our workflow. Let's name it if activity for checking leap year. This activity contains 3 sections: condition, then, and else. The condition field must contain a Boolean expression based on which either the then section or the else section is executed. Let's enter the expression in the condition field. This is the VB.NET expression used to set the conditions. In UiPath workflows, we use VB.NET syntax. Check the link below the video for more information regarding expressions in VB.NET. Remember the conditions that we've mentioned earlier. A leap year is evenly divisible by 4, but if it's evenly divisible by 100, it also needs to be divisible by 400. Now that we've entered the expression in the condition field of the if activity, we'll add 2 message box activities. One on the then branch with the message leap year, and another one on the else branch with the message not a leap year. Let's save the workflow, run it, and test with a few values. That looks good. Great. Now let's see the else-if statement in action. The if and the else-if have the same functionality. Hence, for demo purposes of the else-if statement, we'll use the same condition to check if the reporting year is a leap year or not. But first, let's disable the if activity to check the working of else-if activity. Let's add an else-if activity to our workflow and name it else-if for checking leap year. Before we jump into our workflow, let's see how else-if works. These are designed mainly for sequences. The else-if lets you add multiple conditions. If the first condition is met, then you perform the action under it. You can also add another condition in the second else-if and perform the action if the condition is met. Suppose if none of the above conditions are met, then you do the last action under else. Pretty cool, isn't it? Now imagine a workflow without else-if. You would have multiple if statements in a workflow to add different conditions, and the workflow would be clumsy. Well, thanks to else-if for simplifying this. Alright, let's go back to our use case. This activity contains two sections, condition and then. The condition field must contain a Boolean expression. If it's true, then the then section is executed. If not, the else section is executed. Let's enter the expression in the condition field of the else-if activity. We'll add a message box activity on the body of the then branch with the message leap year. In the else section, let's add a message box with the message not a leap year. Let's save the workflow, run it, and test with a few values. And it works perfectly. Awesome! For the next step, let's develop a workflow with the same logic, but instead of a sequence, we'll use a flowchart. We'll click New Flowchart in the ribbon menu. We'll name it Leap Year Flowchart and add an annotation as well. Let's copy the input dialog activity from the previous workflow and connect it to the Start node. This will make it the first activity to run in the workflow. Now let's define the variable year of type int32. Next, we'll add a flow decision activity. Connect the input dialog activity to it. We'll enter the same expression as in the previous workflow in the condition field. Now let's add the two message boxes and connect them to the true and false branches of the flow decision. It's time to run the workflow and see what we've got. This looks good. We've just solved the same business scenario using the same logic, but with two types of workflows. Since sequences have a simple linear representation, they're best suited for simple scenarios. A scenario that flows from top to bottom, where activities follow each other. Whereas flowcharts are best suited for showcasing important decision points within a process. A sequence would do just fine to solve this scenario. Now that we've seen how to use the if and flow decision activities, there's one more tip that we want to share. The if operator in VB can be very useful for minor local conditions or data computing, and it sometimes can reduce a whole block to a single activity. Let's create a new sequence workflow and use the if operator in VB to solve the same business case. We'll name it Leap Year Sequence and add an annotation. We'll copy the input dialog activity, create the year variable, and also a new variable called message of type string. Next, we'll add an assign activity. And enter the message variable in the to field. Then enter the expression used with the VB if in the value field. Let's analyze how the expression is used with the if operator in VB. It follows the syntax if, open brackets, condition, comma, value if true, comma, value if false, close brackets. The condition is to check if the year is evenly divisible by 4, but if it's evenly divisible by 100, it also must be divisible by 400. The value, if true, returns this year is a leap year. The value, if false, returns this year is not a leap year. Finally, let's add a message box activity and enter the message variable in the text property. Let's run it again. Great! As a short recap, we learned using the if and else if statements in sequence. We also saw the flow decision activity used in flowcharts and the if operator in VB. For more practice on this topic, check the performance of else if activity by using multiple else if conditions. That was all for this demo. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.